With just 1 week until the NFL kicks off, a majority of season-long leagues are drafting over the weekend, which means it's time to get serious about what you're planning to do and who you're planning to target. For me personally, taking 1 or 2 running backs within the first 2 rounds tends to be the path I take more often than not in season-long leagues. Wait too long at running back, and you're generally going to need some major help by way of injuries or unexpected opportunity to get you a reliable starter. Plus, there's only 2 spots in most leagues to fill out at the position, so getting those first 2 rounders in Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor, all of those guys that can be plug-and-plays, week in and week out starters saves you a lot of future headaches with the waiver wire or fab budgeting. But considering there's 3 wide receiver spots in a lot of leagues, including any best ball drafts you've done on the likes of Underdog Fantasy or DraftKings, a lot more draft capital tends to go the way of wideouts. I released a video last week identifying 5 players I believe can win your league this year at various rounds and ADPs, and the fact is that 3 of those were wide receivers: Calvin Ridley, Devonta Smith, and Corey Davis, and that says a lot about the possibility for the position. If you want to know my thoughts and opinions on each of them, check out the video right here, as I want to give you some new information this time around, but definitely still want you drafting those 3. Before we get to the 5 wide receivers though, I think we need to talk about the Awesemo's draft kit because it is the best tool in the industry. I've been using this constantly on ESPN, Yahoo, Underdog. It works so easy and efficiently while you're doing your own draft. You can use the rankings side by side as the draft's going on, simply plugging the players in back and forth, updating the rankings on the sites themselves. I'm telling you, it is the easiest and most efficient way to stay in the game and have a leg up on your competition. Check it out right now using promo code WR to get $5 off. That makes it $9.95 for the best tool in the season-long industry. Check it out, and I promise you won't be disappointed. I've opted to only highlight wide receivers being taken in the 3rd round or later for this video, as the consensus picks in the first 2 rounds should all perform relatively well barring catastrophe. Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers is my favorite player to target. Let's start with his 2020 season. 100 catches was tied for 6th amongst all positions in the NFL, showing his obvious PPR value. His 992 yards and 8 touchdowns is also far more than satisfactory, although you'd like a little more from him this time around if using 3rd round draft capital on him. Luckily, a little bit more from him is exactly what I think you get in 2021. Justin Herbert showed massive promise in his rookie season and obvious rapport with his number 1 target in Allen. The Chargers also shed the dead weight of former head coach Anthony Lynn, bringing in Brandon Staley to lead the team, and noted quarterback guru Joe Lombardi, grandson of Vince Lombardi, as the new offensive coordinator. Also, and I know this doesn't speak directly to Allen's ability, but hear me out. The Chargers' offensive line is completely revamped. Corey Linsley, PFF's number 1 rated center in 2020, was signed away from Green Bay in the offseason. Rashawn Slater, a stud rookie from Northwestern, who the Chargers took with the 13th pick in this year's draft, is immediately going to clean up Herbert's blindside at left tackle. And while switching out Hunter Henry for Jared Cook looks like a downgrade at tight end, that move should slightly increase Allen's target share, as it's one less mouth to feed. But that tidbit about the offensive line is especially important, as Herbert was attacked constantly in 2021 to the tune of 85 hurries, by far the most in the NFL. That in turn directly affected Allen's receiving yards per target, which sat at only 6.7 last year, his lowest mark since 2014, his 2nd year in the league. And his 9.9 receiving yards per reception was the lowest mark of his career. So give Herbert more time in the pocket, and Allen should be able to get a bit further down the field to rack up yardage. It's small edges like that that can make all the difference. So fire away to Allen as the anchor for your wide receiving core should you go running back earlier in the draft. A staple of my season-long lineups for years, Tyler Lockett is coming off a 2nd consecutive 1,000-yard season and should be in store for a similar workload this time around. Of course, the 5'10" wideout is dwarfed in both size and statistic by 6'3" teammate DK Metcalf, who is understandably going middle of the 2nd round due to his 1,300-yard season and 10 touchdown output in 2020. But unlike his counterpart Metcalf, snagging Lockett around his ADP of 46 in standard Yahoo leagues feels like a steal in comparison. especially when Awesemo has him ranked as the 40th best player on the board in that format. He saw 132 targets to Metcalf's 129 in 2020, 90 balls compared to Metcalf's 83, carries the same big play ability as him, although they won't stand out the same way because Metcalf's a beast, and the identical 10 touchdown output. Do I think all other things being equal, I'd want Metcalf over Lockett? Of course, but things are not equal when their ADPs are legitimately 2 rounds apart. And if head coach Pete Carroll indeed decides to pound the rock with Chris Carson and underutilize Russell Wilson yet again in 2021, the impact of drafting Metcalf will be far more penal than drafting that of Lockett. But after all of the offseason hoopla surrounding Russell Wilson, I believe he continues to ball out this season. And in a nightmare NFC West division with the likes of the Rams, 49ers, and Cardinals, the Seahawks, with their defense that looks incapable of rushing the passer yet again this season, should lead to some nice surprising shootout opportunities for Lockett and company. So if he's there in the late 4th round of your drafts, Lockett is an auto-click for me in 2021. It's rare to have a player that the average football fan has never even heard of grading out this well in Awesemo's rankings, but that's what it looks like we have with Jaguars receiver Laviska Shenault Jr. this season. I always have to remind my fellow fantasy football colleagues and friends that we live in a bubble working in the fantasy industry, and just because someone leaps off the page for us doesn't mean they leap off the page for Joe Schmo in your work league. Shenault is a second-year wideout out of Colorado that the Jags took with the 42nd pick in the 2020 draft. He gained some traction in deep leagues last season, accumulating 600 yards and 5 scores that made him a serviceable option on certain weeks. Still, there is no doubt he needs to see a sharp increase to that production to make him a weekly starter for your teams. Enter Trevor Lawrence. Now, I don't know about you, but getting a consensus number 1 pick feels like a dramatic upgrade to a team's passing prospects, especially when the player there before was 6th round pick Gardner Minshew. I'm not saying Minshew wasn't serviceable, but come on. Lawrence should get every opportunity to sling it around all season long, and with a Jaguars defense that should continue to be atrocious on the other side, there's going to be lots and lots of garbage time opportunity for everyone wearing black and teal this year. Now, to Shenault. The dude is a physical monster, not afraid to initiate contact and bulldoze his way to extra yards. The Jaguars drafting ATN was one of the major detractors for me earlier on, as a lot of Shenault's value would be mined out of getting the ball into his hands early and often, in the run game even, as he accumulated 18 rushes in 2020 to add just a tiny bit of extra value to fantasy owners. But with ATN now out for the season with his mid-foot sprain, the Jaguars should be focused on utilizing Shenault in a variety of ways all over the field, making him a massive breakout candidate. Awesemo's rankings indicated Shenault was a great target even before the ATN injury, but in the aftermath, you're looking at a huge discrepancy between our rankings as wide receiver 26, or the 71st overall player on the board, and his current ADP of 91. That makes him one of the best values to target in the middle of your drafts, as the payoff could be immense if Lawrence is as good as advertised. And in today's edition of Don't Forget About Me, Devante Parker would like a word. He makes one of the best buy low wide receiver picks in drafts coming off a disappointing 2020 campaign. Fighting a hamstring injury early in the season, Parker's production tailed off considerably from his monster 2019, catching just 63 balls for under 800 yards and only 4 scores. But having only played 14 games, those numbers have to be considered his floor if he stays healthy this year. And I get it. He's got some actual competition at wide receiver on his team now, with playmaker Will Fuller and rookie Jalen Waddle sure to push him for targets. But Fuller's suspended for week 1, plus could never stay healthy throughout his entire time in Houston. And Waddle, there's still a lot of unknowns for him as a rookie, though he certainly could be something, but time will tell. As for Parker, he's demonstrated he can be a bona fide number 1. In 2019, we're talking about a player who put up 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. He's only 28 years old, so I don't think him being dusty is the concern. It's simply going to come down to second-year quarterback Tua Tagovailoa taking a jump in play. But seeing as his ADP is all the way into the mid-130s, and Awesemo has him ranked inside the top 80, the data is all pointing in Parker's direction. Best of luck to Fuller staying healthy, and Waddle delivering on his preseason promise, but I'm siding with Parker in this spot as a player who can absolutely send your team to the moon if Tua can look more in his direction this year. Let's get weird, shall we? The New Orleans Saints have been an oft-talked-about team in the wake of naming Jameis Winston their starting quarterback. The signs were there already, as Sean Payton brought him in to study from a dusty Drew Brees, and maybe that tutelage will pay off and cut down on his turnover problems. Either way, Winston should bring points and confidence to a Saints offense that is full of playmakers, specifically in the pass-catching back department with extraordinaire Alvin Kamara. But with Michael Thomas now announced as out with an ankle injury for at least the first 5 weeks of the season, the wide receiver room looks especially bleak in New Orleans. Tre'Quan Smith is a name NFL DFSers are surely familiar with, as his random spiked weeks over the past few seasons have been frustrating to try and capture. And Deontay Harris and his whole 25 targets in 2020 is probably going to be a second or third round option in this offense, speaking to just how brutal the pass catching situation is in New Orleans with Thomas out. However, anyone who watched the Saints preseason football, it was impossible to miss the potential impact Marquez Callaway could make in 2020. In a Monday night primetime game against the Jaguars in week 2 of the preseason, Callaway made a highlight reel catch after catch, finishing with 5 catches for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. Of course, this is the preseason, so expectations are tempered, but it's hard to ignore the obvious rapport that was there between him and Winston. Because of Hurricane Ida, that was the last we saw of the Saints in the preseason, which could make targeting Callaway a little sneakier to the masses than if he had popped off for another massive preseason game. So with that in mind, why not take a shot on Callaway in a Sean Payton-helmed offense with a quarterback willing to sling it, playing half their games in a dome at the end of your draft? Now, I'd be shocked if the Saints didn't make some kind of a play for a wide receiver in the open market. But as it stands right now, Callaway is unquestionably my favorite receiver from New Orleans. The opportunity cost of adding him to your roster is basically zero, so stash him away, and if the situation breaks right, you could have a potential league winner in Callaway for virtually nothing. And those are my top 5 wide receiver targets here for the season, in addition to the 3 wide receivers I gave in my first video. Be sure to check that one out here on the way out. Also, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell so you know when any content is coming out here on the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. I'm Lindquist, and best of luck in your 2021 drafts.